We're in Galatians chapter 1. Should finish up that chapter today, maybe go into chapter 2 a little bit. By way of a reminder where we left off, Paul is defending himself, defending the fact that he is an apostle, defending that he is inspired of God, and he's been describing that he had not received the gospel from any man. Meaning, of course, that he received it directly from God, that he is inspired. And we left off about verse 17. I'll read that and just kind of refresh your memory. Neither went I up to Jerusalem to them which were apostles before me, but I went up unto Arabia and returned, went into Arabia and returned again unto Damascus. So we have record of Paul after his conversion. He didn't go back to Jerusalem. Why is that significant to Paul's argument and his defense here? Exactly. He didn't see any of them after he was, and of course that was where the church was established, and that was where the apostles were at the time. So he didn't go to where the apostles were or any of the other well-known brethren to be taught by them. And so remember where Paul was taught the gospel, where did that occur? Remember where he met up with Ananias? That was in the area of Damascus. Yeah, but then when he met up with Ananias after the event on the road to Damascus. And after that, he didn't go back to Jerusalem. He went down to the Arabia, as he said there in verse 17, and then returned again unto Damascus. So he hasn't been back to Jerusalem yet since that time. Now, a couple of other notes here. We mentioned this briefly last week, but you remember Paul's reputation and what he had been doing before he was converted. He was well known for his persecution against the church, having a part in at least one execution of a Christian, Stephen, and then also imprisoning other Christians just for being Christians. And we mentioned last week, but because of his reputation in that, how do you think Christians were going to feel about trying to approach him with the gospel? Yeah, I mean, that's we already know how he's going to respond. We know what he's doing to Christians, so he's not going to be the target of someone who's looking to evangelize, so he's not being taught by Christians is the point. And Paul's making this point. He didn't receive the gospel in a normal way. He didn't receive the message from any man. He received it directly from God. He's inspired of God is his point. He's defending his apostleship. Then after his conversion, he went away to Arabia instead of going back to Jerusalem. Because if he had gone back to Jerusalem, his argument is he could have been taught by the apostles or other Christians. But that wasn't where he got the message. He's defending his inspiration, his apostleship. Also, we mentioned last week, he mentioned, neither I went up to Jerusalem to them which were apostles before me. Don't misunderstand that terminology, before me. Some were arguing against Paul, saying that if he's an apostle at all, he's kind of a lower apostle. Don't misunderstand the terminology before me. What does he mean by before me? They became apostles in time prior to him becoming an apostle. So in the sense of time, not in the sense of status in any way. They were all the apostles were of the same status. They're apostles of Jesus Christ. Now, going to verse 18, let's read from verse 18, just go to the end of the chapter. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to see Peter and abode with him 15 days. And other of the apostles but other of the apostles saw I none, save James, the Lord's brother. Now the things which I write unto you, behold, before God I lie not. Afterwards I came into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and was known by face unto the churches of Judea, which were in Christ. But they had heard, I think I may have spoke that wrong. Verse 22, but was unknown by face unto the churches of Judea, which were in Christ. But they had heard only that he which persecuted us in time past now preacheth the faith which once he destroyed, and they glorified God in me. All right, we'll pause there and back up to verse 18. And after 3 years, now, where's the measuring starting point for that 3 years? I don't know exactly. It's hard to say with exact precision, but it must be somewhere in either from the starting point when he the earliest I think he could be talking about is when he left Jerusalem to go to Damascus originally. Now he could be measuring that from when he went to Arabia. I don't know. Or when he went back to Damascus. I'm not sure exactly where the starting point of that 3 years, but it was 3 years from somewhere in this general time frame. But really the exact measurement of that 3 years, non-consequential, really. Doesn't make a huge impact because Paul's point is still the same. No matter where exactly you start that measuring of the 3 years. His point is, as we've been describing, he was not taught or trained by men but he was away either from when he got to Damascus originally or when he left Jerusalem. He was away in Arabia for around 3 years. What would that give time to do? Well, he's receiving revelation directly from God at some point during that time for sure. And this is where his argument is. This is where he received, and his spiritual growth occurred, or much of it anyway. And he's receiving revelation. He's inspired of God. And perhaps receiving that task that we mentioned earlier to go to the Gentiles. Now, after this 3 years, he went up to Jerusalem, and who does he see? Peter. Okay, this is his first contact with another apostle since the time of his conversion. So after 3 years, went up to Jerusalem to see Peter. Now, does he say that I went up to learn from Peter so that I could learn the gospel? No, he didn't say that, did he? But remember, Peter is obviously an apostle. He's a leader in the church. And he's not only is he an apostle, but he's a prominent apostle. You had some that, like even us today, there are some of the apostles that we don't know much about. They're apostles of Christ, but we don't know much about them. But Peter's not one of those. He's a very prominent apostle. We know a lot about Peter. So he brings him up. And even at that time, it seems like Peter was among the leadership of the apostles. So Paul goes to see Peter. Now, he's not going to learn from Peter. He's not going to be taught by Peter. He goes to see Peter. He's going to make his acquaintance and get to know him. They are fellow apostles in Jesus Christ. And he's going there not to gain knowledge from Peter, but to get to know the person, Peter. That's significant. Again, not being taught, not receiving the gospel, as Paul is already inspired of God. Now, go into verse 19. But other of the apostles saw I none, save James the Lord's brother. Now, that's a short verse, but there are multiple things that we need to discuss and try to work through in this one short verse. First of all, don't get the idea that Paul is discrediting the other apostles. I went to see Peter. I didn't see any of the other. I didn't want to go see them. No, don't get the impression that he's discrediting the other apostles. But he's simply, again, he's stressing the fact that he received the gospel by divine revelation. He's inspired. He didn't receive it of any man, including any of the apostles, not even Peter, although he went to see Peter. He didn't receive the gospel from him, and he didn't even see any of the other apostles. Now, there's something else we need to spend a few minutes talking about to try and figure out or work through in our own minds, because there's some debate about who this James is. And is he actually an apostle in the official sense? And is he literally the physical brother of Jesus, or maybe simply a general relative, or maybe even in a spiritual sense, the brother of Jesus? Now, there's some debate on all those things. So let's kind of try to work through some of that and look at some possibilities of what Paul is describing here. Okay? So first of all, let's talk about the question of who is this James that Paul mentions in verse 19. And really, there are only three options that could be even considered legitimate options. As you look at the New Testament, there are three men by the name of James who are really of New Testament significance. Who are they? Do you remember? Three men by the name of James. James, the son of Alphaeus. Who else? James who? The brother of the Lord, the physical, we'll call him the half-brother of Jesus. Now, why we say half-brother? Let's just remind ourselves. Yeah. Joseph was not the biological father of Jesus, but he and Mary had other children after Jesus was born. So we'll call this other James the half-brother of Jesus. So we got James, the son of Alphaeus, and James, the physical half-brother of Jesus. And who's the third James? Yes, James. I think James Alphaeus would be James the Less, if I remember correctly. Y'all correct me if I got that wrong. But then you have James, the son of Zebedee. So James Alphaeus, who I think is also called James the Less. And but you also got James, son of Zebedee, who was the brother of whom? Brother of John. And of course, both of those James, the son of Zebedee and James, the son of Alphaeus, were both apostles. Zebedee was John's father. So you got James, the son of Zebedee. Also, John was the son of Zebedee. So James and John were brothers. And then you got another James who is also an apostle, James, the son of Alphaeus. Okay? James' father. I don't know. I'm not sure much about him. Peter's called, actually, three names come quickly to mind. Cephas, that's another term, Peter's name. Also, what else is Peter called? Before he became Peter, what was he known as? Simon. So Simon is Peter, and also Cephas is there a reference to Peter as well. Very good for noticing that. So, two apostles named James. Then you've got the physical half-brother of Jesus called James. So those are the three James of New Testament significance. They're really the only three possibilities we could be talking about, that Paul could be talking about in verse 19. Now, one of these men, we can very quickly take out of the conversation. Which one is that? The brother of John, the son of Zebedee. And why can we quickly take him out of the conversation? He was killed. And you go back to Acts 11, 12, verses 1 and 2. Somebody go read that for us real quick. Acts 12, verses 1 and 2. All right, so it's specifically stated which James this is, so that's helpful. James, the brother of John, so this would be the apostle James, the son of Zebedee, James' brother, or John's brother, executed by whom? By Herod. Okay, and this is Acts chapter 12, and so this would be before Paul finished that 3-year period and returned back to Jerusalem and met with Peter. Okay, so this James has already died. So we can take him out of the conversation because Paul would not have met this James when he went back to Jerusalem. Now, that brings the question to the other two. Okay, you got James the son of Alphaeus and James the physical brother of Jesus. Now, that brings another question though. Because when you think about the terms apostle and Lord's brother in verse 19, neither one of these men fit those terms in the most literal sense. Because one of them was an official apostle, held the office of an apostle, but was not the physical brother of Jesus. And the other one was not in the official position of an apostle, but was the Lord's brother. So how do you work all this out? Well, sometimes terms are used in different ways, and that may play a role. For example, somebody read for us Acts 14, verse 14. Acts 14, verse 14.
When the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of, they rent their clothes and ran in among the people, crying out.
Okay, now, was Barnabas an apostle in the official sense? No, he wasn't. But the term apostle is used here to refer to Barnabas, both Barnabas and Paul. Well, what does the term apostle mean? One sent, a messenger. Was Barnabas sent? Was he a messenger of the gospel? Absolutely. So we have the term here used to refer to Barnabas. Although he was not an apostle in the official sense, he was one sent. So it could be that Paul is using the term that way. It could be. Now, also, the term the Lord's brother. That could also be something that's used in a general sense, maybe a general relative, not a literal brother as a sibling, having the same mother, but maybe a relative in a general sense, or maybe even in a spiritual sense. So we have some possibilities there. Or there's another possibility as well. Let me go. Thought I'd turn back to Acts, but I was still in Galatians. Notice this 19 again. But other of the apostles saw I none save James the Lord's brother. Some have suggested that there is a kind of a division in thought between I saw none save James the Lord's brother. So some believe that the thought is kind of divided there, meaning I saw none of the other apostles, but I did see someone else of influence, of great reputation, which would be James the Lord's brother. So some have suggested that. And what is the exact answer to it? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. However, I do have, I guess I'll call it a strong opinion about which James this is. I think it's the Lord's brother. And the main reason I think that is because it fits, first of all, it fits a couple of those thoughts that we just went through. Even if there's a division of thought there, it certainly fits that very well. But also as you continue in the context, and especially going to chapter 2, there's going to be a James that continues to be brought up. And who is that clearly in that context? That's the Lord's brother. So I don't have a reason to think Paul's talking about a different James here in verse 19. Well, ultimately, I don't guess it would, but it's Paul's point's still the same, either way. But it is good to know who exactly Paul's talking about here. No, not necessarily, because it really doesn't change Paul's point. But there is some discussion. In fact, there's accusations made against because neither one of those two James that are possibilities fit those two terms in the most literal way. So some have made accusations against Paul and against the Bible because of that. But there's really no reason for it. Yeah.
Right there for James, it references Matthew 13:55. It says, "Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? His brethren James and Joseph and Simon and Judas."
All right, so that's one of the texts that lists some of Jesus' siblings or half siblings, other children of Mary, but they would of course had Joseph as their biological father as well. So that just shows that Jesus did have a physical brother named James. Further questions, comments? Correct. He was, James, the physical brother of Jesus, was not one of the official apostles. Now, was he one sent in a lot of ways? Absolutely. Son of Zebedee. Mm-hmm. And the son of Zebedee was also the brother of John, James and John. Those are the sons of Zebedee. Say again? Yes. Yeah, I think either the term apostle here is one just used in a general sense as one sent, or that there could be, as we mentioned, the possibility of a division of thought here that Paul said, "I saw none of the apostles, but I did see someone of reputation, James, the Lord's brother." Either one of those possibilities is what I'm not sure which one it is. Further questions, comments? All right, go to verse 20, now that we got all that figured out. Verse 20, now the things which I write unto you, behold, before God I lie not. So he confirms everything. He's kind of essentially making an oath. These things are absolutely true. I have no reason to be lying about this, no reason to be deceiving you in any way. In fact, they already knew this. They knew Paul well. He had been there with them and taught them personally. They knew these things. But he's reconfirming it with an oath. In verse 20, afterwards I came into the regions of Syria and Cilicia. Now I wanted to point out some of these. I don't have Syria labeled on the map, but what was the capital of Syria? Damascus. So we know where Damascus is. But it is labeled right there, isn't it? My brain didn't even see it. Okay. I was wondering that too. But when I looked at the map earlier, I said Syria is not labeled, but it's right there in front of me. But anyway, well, you see Cilicia. I do see that one. That's labeled up here. By the way, this is significant because where was Paul from? He was known as Saul of Tarsus, and that's right there in Cilicia. Okay, so that's significant as well. So he returned back to Syria, which is where Damascus is, of course, and then went back to his home, where he was from after these events. Now, continue with me in verse 22. And was unknown by face unto the churches of Judea, which were in Christ. Now, so he was unknown by face. In other words, they didn't know what he looked like, but they knew his reputation. They knew what he had been doing. And in fact, he describes that more in verse 23. But they had heard only. They didn't know he was unknown by face, but they had heard only that he which persecuted us in times past now preacheth the faith which once he destroyed. So Again, they had not met Paul, didn't know what he looked like, but he heard this great persecutor of the church is now a Christian. And he's not only a Christian, he is a preacher. He's spreading the good news. He's traveling about teaching and preaching. They heard these things. And notice the term in verse 23, now preacheth the faith. What does that terminology mean, the faith? Christianity, the gospel system, the entire covenant, the Christian system that Christ established. The body of belief of Christianity, the new covenant, the gospel system, as we've been. So he's preaching it. Paul is. So, and now this one who'd been known and has a reputation of a great persecutor, now he's gaining a reputation of a preacher of the gospel, the faith. Still didn't know Paul, but they're hearing that this former persecutor is a fellow Christian and gospel preacher. And what's their response? Verse 24. They glorified God in me. And the terminology there, they glorified God. They kept on glorifying. This is a continual process. They kept on glorifying God. And so they're glorifying God. They recognize God as the source, the author of the faith, the gospel system that Paul has been preaching. So they, even though they didn't know Paul, they recognized what he was preaching and that he was doing this from God, and they're glorifying God because of it. Now, why would the Galatians start questioning it? Even those who knew Paul as a great persecutor were glorifying God in that Paul was now preaching the gospel. It is an amazing transition, no doubt about it. But he was recognized for what he was now doing, despite his history, despite his reputation, his past. Questions, comments? All right, let's go into chapter 2. I'm going to read the first 5 verses. Then 14 years after, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas and took Titus with me also. And I went up by revelation and communicated unto them that gospel which I preached among the Gentiles, but privately to them which were of reputation, lest by any means I should run or had run in vain. But neither Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised, but that because of false brethren unawares brought in, who came in privily to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ Jesus, that they might bring us into bondage. To whom we gave place by subjection, no, not for an hour, that the truth of the gospel might continue with you. All right, now we have some more time being described by Paul. As he begins, we go into chapter 2, we have 14 years. Then 14 years after, he said. After what? Well, again, I don't know exactly the measuring point on this, but it would have been somewhere in the general time frame of the events he just described. Okay? 14 years, maybe since his conversion, maybe since his going into Arabia, was it since that visit with Peter? I don't know for sure. But either way, it doesn't affect the meaning. But perhaps since that previous meeting, it kind of flows that it would have been maybe since that previous meeting in Jerusalem, but I don't know for sure. But it doesn't change the effect of what Paul's describing either way. Now, it is worth mentioning that Paul did make at least one visit to Jerusalem between those two events. He went to visit with Peter, as he just described. Now he's describing something 14 years later when he goes back to Jerusalem. It is worth mentioning that we know he went to Jerusalem at least once between these two events. Now, how do we know that? Well, Acts 11 and 12 describe that return to Jerusalem. Now, is that a contradiction? No. Even though the events of Acts 11 and 12 took place between these two visits to Jerusalem that he's describing here in Galatians, it's not a contradiction. Paul's simply not talking about that visit because it has nothing to do with his discussion. He's talking about how he received the gospel directly from deity. He's talking about his inspiration. He's talking about the reality that he is an apostle, that he didn't receive it from any other man. Not even the apostles taught him. That's what he's describing in this context. But that other visit to Jerusalem in Acts 11 and 12, that had nothing to do with this, to what Paul is describing. So, because what was his purpose in Acts 11 and 12? Why did he go to Jerusalem? Say again? Now that was the time before that, and we just mentioned here. But the one in Acts 11 and 12 was for a different purpose. He and Barnabas were delivering a benevolent gift to the church in Jerusalem. It has nothing to do with his discussion here. His purpose in Acts 11 and 12 was not to go see the apostles or to meet with them in any way. So it's just not part of the discussion, so he doesn't mention it. So we don't have a contradiction there at all. It's also, I believe we mentioned this before, but I think it's worth mentioning that he says he went up again to Jerusalem. Now, he's traveling south. Typically, when we travel south, what do we say? We're going down to wherever. But we know why this terminology is he's going up to Jerusalem. Why? It's an elevation. Anywhere around Jerusalem, if you're traveling from anywhere around Jerusalem, you've got to go up in elevation to get there. So we see that terminology being used here by Paul and multiple other places in the Bible as well. They go up to get to Jerusalem. And he mentions two people with him on this occasion in Galatians 2 verse 1. Who's with him? Titus and Barnabas. Now, we have a parallel account. What Paul is describing here as we go into chapter 2, we have a parallel account with Acts 15. Okay, when we see Barnabas, but in Acts 15, there's no mention of Titus. I think that's interesting. But we have this account, which describes both Barnabas and Titus being with Paul as they go to Jerusalem. In fact, somebody read, we have a little bit more detail of what was going on and what happened to cause this visit to Jerusalem. Somebody read Acts 15 verses 1 and 2. All right. Thank you, sir. Notice that terminology that Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and disputation. Is that what King James, is that terminology the King James has? No small dissension and disputation. Now, what does that mean? If it's no small dissension and disputation, what does that mean? It's a big one, right? It was no small one. They had a big disputation. In fact, some translations say they had a heated argument and debate. Some translations describe it that way. So they got a major problem going on here. And the text there describes what Brother Billy just read, describes some of what that problem was, what that debate, that dissension, that dispute was about. And what was it? Circumcision. There were some teaching there and bringing back in at least aspects of the law of Moses, and it kind of centered on circumcision. Paul and Barnabas are going there, and here, when you come back to Galatians 2, it also tells us that Titus is with them as well. Now, let's go into verse 2. So we just got a few minutes left. And I went up by revelation. Now, Acts 15 does not tell us that Paul, it was revealed directly from God that he needed to go to, but he tells us here that he went there because of a revelation from God. An absolute command. No options. Paul, you need to go to Jerusalem. Again, Acts 15 doesn't tell us that part, but here we have more revealed to us in Galatians chapter 2. Also, it's interesting that Titus is mentioned. We have Barnabas and Titus mentioned here in Galatians 2, but there were other people traveling with Paul too. Now, Galatians 2 doesn't mention any of that, but you go back to Acts 15, then you have others traveling with them as well. Titus is not specifically mentioned, but you have multiple other people traveling with Paul and Barnabas in Acts 15. Now, when we have accounts like this, and you find this sort of thing a lot in the gospel accounts as well. And sometimes people will start making accusations. These accounts don't match up. That doesn't make any sense. You have complementary information, not contradictory information. There is nothing in these two accounts that contradicts the other one. You have simply additional information that complements and gives you more of the account. You have more details of what's going on, additional information. Now, and also it's possible, and I don't know, I wonder if because Paul received revelation, as he describes here in Galatians 2, if it's because of that others in Acts 15, if they decided we need to go with Paul. He's receiving direct command, revelation from God to go to Jerusalem. We need to go with him and assist in this or be a part of what's happening. Again, I don't know if that's why others went with him, but I wonder about that because you put the two accounts together and you just get more information. And it sometimes brings even more questions. But we don't have all the details, but we have additional details. And we're out of time. All right, Lord willing, we'll continue talking about Galatians 2, verse 2 next week.